Our lives are shaped as profoundly by personality as by gender or race. One of the most important aspects of personality is where we fall on the introvert-extrovert spectrum. Our place on this continuum influences our choice of friends, how we converse, resolve differences, and show love. The careers we choose, and if we'll succeed in them. It affects how likely we are to exercise, cheat on our partners, how well we'll function without sleep, learn from our mistakes, place bets on the stock markets, delay gratification, and be a good leader. These words were written by Susan Cain in her 2012 book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. The central theme of this book is that we live in a world that values extroverted behaviour, when up to half of people are actually introverted. She explores how extroversion has become the cultural ideal in our Western society, how introverts and extroverts think differently, and the communication gap between the two. I really enjoyed reading this book, and I learned a lot about myself as an extrovert and about introverted people and how to bridge the communication gap. But I also found it quite difficult to read sometimes. The more I read, the more I felt guilty for my own behaviour as an extrovert. And at the same time, I found myself getting a little defensive of extrovert behaviour because I'm one. But I'm glad I persisted with this book because it led to a lot of introspection and I learned a lot. So in this book review of Quiet, I'll summarise some key parts of the book, pull out some interesting quotes for your consideration, and then I'll offer my review at the end. But given this channel, the Quilling Quarter, is about discovering quilling and the creative process, I'll focus on the impact of introversion on creativity, because there are many other aspects explored in this book, including investing, East versus Western culture, leadership, personal relationships, but creativity is what I want to focus on for this book review, particularly the chapter titled When Collaboration Kills Creativity. But first, we need to understand what introversion and extroversion is. Carl Jung popularised the terms introvert and extrovert in his 1921 book, Personality Types. In it, he said, introverts are drawn to the inner world of thought and feeling. Extroverts are drawn to the external life of people and activities. Introverts charge their batteries by being alone, and extroverts need to recharge when they don't socialise enough. But as Carl Jung said in his book, there is no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert. Such a person would be in a lunatic asylum. The issue is that in Western culture, we have cultivated an extrovert ideal. Our society values talkative, gregarious, alpha, risk-taking, high-energy, quick-thinking types who love working in groups and socialising. And it has led to many introverted people having to act as extroverted in order to fit in. But Susan argued that without introverts, we would not have the theory of gravity, courtesy of Sir Isaac Newton, the theory of relativity from Albert Einstein, W.B. Yeats's The Second Coming, Frédéric Chopin's Nocturnes, Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, George Orwell's 1984 An Animal Farm, Theodore Geisel, better known for his pen name as Dr. Seuss, with his Cat in the Hat, and Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List and E.T., Google, courtesy of Larry Page, and Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. Many of these people's achievements were not in spite of, but because of their introversion. Susan argues that there is a bias against introverts, and as an introvert, you may have heard your parents apologise for you being shy as a child, or prodded you to come out of your shell in school. Even now, you might feel guilty for declining a dinner invitation or not wanting to answer a ringing phone, or people may have chastised you for being too much in your own head. Interestingly, Susan often referred back to the successful partnerships between introverts and extroverts. Chief among them include Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, Eleanor Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt, and Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs.
So I just published a book about introversion, and it took me about 7 years to write. And for me, that 7 years was like total bliss, because You know, I was reading, I was writing, I was thinking, I was researching. But now, all of a sudden, my job is very different. And my job is to be out here talking about it, talking about introversion.
So now we have a working definition of introversion and extroversion. I want to explore a particular chapter in this book titled When Collaboration Kills Creativity. And I'm going to draw on 3 examples Susan offers about how introverts are more creative than extroverts. So the first example is with Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak co-founded Apple with Steve Jobs. Wozniak is a famously shy, solitary, genius man who helped invent the Apple computer. He did most of his work inside his cubicle, outside of working hours at Hewlett-Packard when his colleagues weren't there. When he did have his breakthrough moment, where he finished building his prototype and letters appeared on the screen, he was alone. When providing advice to kids who just aspire to great creativity, Steve Wozniak is quoted as saying, "Most inventors and engineers I've met are like me. They're shy and they live in their heads. They're almost like artists. In fact, the very best of them are artists. And artists work best alone, where they can control an invention's design without a lot of other people designing it for marketing or some other committee. I don't believe anything really revolutionary has been invented by a committee." If you're that rare engineer who's an inventor and also an artist, I'm going to give you some advice that might be hard to take. That advice is work alone. You're going to be able to design revolutionary products and features if you're working on your own, not on a committee, not on a team. I found this really interesting. Considering Steve Wozniak partnered with Steve Jobs to found Apple, Steve Jobs is famous for designing a building that encouraged unplanned collaboration, and this style of working led to some of the most groundbreaking and original Pixar movies. Steve Jobs has even said that this sort of unplanned collaboration actually spurs on creativity.
Our business depends upon collaboration, and it depends upon unplanned collaboration. And so we were just too spread out, and the groups were, developing their own styles. We were growing into several divisions instead of one company. And so the goal was pure and simple. We want to put everybody under one roof, and we want to encourage unplanned collaborations.
So in my opinion, and as Susan said, Wozniak and Jobs are great examples of an introverted and extroverted pair that work well together. Both are brilliant inventors and both have different approaches to life. And I don't think Wozniak is correct that it's best not to work in a team to deliver something revolutionary across the board. It just worked for him. Second example is about Anders Ericsson and his research into deliberate practice. In a study he ran, he looked at expert violinists at an elite music academy in West Berlin. They found that the best violinists rated practice alone as the most important of all their music-related activities in a week. Elite musicians describe practice sessions with a chamber group as leisure, compared with solo practice, which is actually where the real work gets done. Anders Ericsson found this effect of solitude in many other fields. And he says that when you practice deliberately, you identify the tasks or knowledge that are just outside your reach and you strive to upgrade your performance, and you monitor your progress and you revise accordingly. And this is best done alone, so you can concentrate intensely on identifying the things you need to work on. Again, my natural inclination when I was reading this was to become defensive of extroverts. I don't think deliberate practice is uniquely the realm of introverts. I think that everyone needs their alone time, and having time and space to think leads to clearer and deeper thinking. But I could be wrong here too. Later in the book, Susan does say that introversion predicts academic performance better than cognitive ability. So maybe it's true that deliberative practice is more broadly inhabited by introverts because they are more likely to stick with something and have the patience to see it through. The third example in this chapter was about Susan Cain herself when she was writing this book. She had carefully set up her home office, cleaned the desk and had plenty of space and plenty of natural light, but then she felt too cut off from the world to type a single keystroke there. Instead, she found she wrote the majority of this book on a laptop in her favourite neighbourhood cafe. The mere presence of other people helped her make associative leaps. Lots of people were huddled over their laptops, concentrating intensely, and lots of them were getting work done. Interestingly, Susan said that this cafe was different from modern workplaces and modern schools that force collaboration and interruptions. The cafe was social, but didn't force people to have unwelcome chats. She was free to deliberately practice her writing, and she could switch between observer and social actor whenever she wanted. And she could control her environment and leave it whenever she wanted as well. Once she had done her writing for the day, she was free to go home and edit in peace and quiet. And she usually left after about 3 to 4 hours, not 8 to 10 hours that most office workers usually put in. So in summary, some types of collaboration do kill creativity. But Susan never suggested to stop collaborating face to face, just refine how we do it. There is a certain magic in the symbiotic introvert-extrovert relationships where leaders and tasks are divided according to people's natural strengths, and the most effective teams are comprised of a healthier mix of introverts and extroverts. Too much of either can lead to bad outcomes, but solitude matters. I felt a real constant push-pull when reading this book. My whole school and university and working life, I've been encouraged to lean into my extroverted side, to be social, to contribute to discussion, and that silence might be perceived as me not paying attention. But I understand the introvert's dilemma, and that we in the Western world are conditioned to think quick, make decisions, and always collaborate. I found this book really illuminating. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I found it hard to read sometimes because I realised how much I benefit from being an extrovert in an extrovert's world. I like talking, I like working with others, and even though I value time to myself, I get energy from being with people and not from being alone. And to be completely honest, some parts of this book were quite confronting in how much I took for granted as an extrovert myself. Literally, whenever there was a comparison to an extrovert, I always identified with it without fail. I thought an interesting comparison was with left-handedness versus right-handedness. We live in a right-hand person's world. Most machinery, most doors, appliances, university desks, and books are designed for right-handed people. Most people don't realise this because they are right-handed people and it doesn't affect them. But I notice it because I am left-handed. During school, binders drove me crazy because I would have to position myself so awkwardly to write on the page. Same with ballpoint pens. These work best when you pull the ink across the page to draw the ink out. But when you're pushing the pen onto the page, after a short time the ink stops coming out and the pen stops working. So to mimic right-handers, I have to really position myself in an awkward writing style. I seem to be the only one I knew struggling with this problem. I felt left out. So I've been very aware and conscious of how the world is designed for right-handed people my whole life, because I'm not in this group. But I didn't realise how much of life is designed for the extrovert ideal because I am in this group. While I love time by myself, thinking about ideas, planning and working on my quilling and working on these videos, I love being with people and that's where I get my energy from. I do really like my alone time, but I do start going crazy if it's for too long. That's what made the COVID lockdown quite hard for me because all of a sudden I wasn't seeing anyone except my partner and our 2 cats. I found it really interesting to think when I was reading this book how many of my friends and family are introverts. And while I get a lot of energy from being with people, I actually get exhausted by people who are more extroverted than I am, which was interesting. Another really interesting part I found in this book was how Susan said she went to a Tony Robbins conference and hated it. But when she went to an introverts retreat, she liked it at first, but then she thought to herself, shouldn't someone start jumping on a table and entertaining everybody? I found it fascinating how this experience highlighted to Susan that introverts need extroverts and extroverts need introverts. I think the biggest problem is the communication gap between the two, but being self-aware and knowing when you need to be around people and when you need alone time is so important, but not knowing can be really confusing. One thing I found really interesting was that subject of creativity, the chapter I discussed earlier. Susan said that the majority of worthwhile inventions and creations were done by introverts who had the time alone to think and develop ideas. I feel like this is in direct conflict with my previous book review, Creativity Inc., which said, as I mentioned earlier, that the secret to Pixar's success was their brains trust meetings. People come together and they share ideas and they build off them. And while I do agree that anything worthwhile does require thought and to think clearly, and it is usually done alone, I don't think this is just what introverts are capable of. Extroverts can do it too. And extroverts enjoy their alone time as well. Another interesting thing I found out about myself when I was reading this book is that, almost without fail, anytime I read a book, it's because someone recommended it to me, or because I'll discuss it as part of book club, or because I'll talk about it with someone, or I'll talk about it with you on this channel. My whole aim is to share it and share my thoughts on it at some point. And while reading this book was a solitary affair at the time, I never intended to keep what I'd learnt to myself. It's really as if I can't help but share what I've learned, because that's how I learn. When I was at high school and uni, I'd come home at the end of the day and I'd talk about all the things I'd learned that day with my mum. And by talking about it and teaching her what I'd learned, it confirmed what I'd learned in my head. It's as if I need to talk about something to solidify it in my own mind. So I bought this book from a second-hand market at the Blue Mountains. Its simple cover drew my attention and encouraged me to read the blurb. And as I was reading it, my partner said he'd heard about this book and said it was well reviewed. So on impulse, I bought it then and there for $5. I really did like this book. Susan has a great writing style that's easy to read and she expresses her ideas clearly. This book opened my eyes to a whole new perspective on the world and how other people experience it. And while there were some parts that I disagreed with, and I became quite defensive of extroverts, I'm glad I persisted with this book because I did learn new things and familiar concepts were put into a new light. So I will finish here now and leave you with a quote from Susan Cain, where she offers 3 calls to action to improve the world for introverts and extroverts alike. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Goodbye.
Number 1, stop the madness for constant group work. Just stop it. Thank you. And I want to be clear about what I'm saying, because I deeply believe our offices should be encouraging casual, chatty, cafe-style types of interactions, the kind where people come together and serendipitously have an exchange of ideas. That is great. That's great for introverts and it's great for extroverts. But we need much more privacy, much more freedom, much more autonomy at work. School, same thing. We need to be teaching kids to work together, for sure. But we also need to be teaching them how to work on their own. This is especially important for extroverted children too. They need to work on their own because that is where deep thought comes from, in part. Okay, number 2, go to the wilderness. Be like Buddha. Have your own revelations. I'm not saying that we all have to now go off and build our own cabins in the woods and never talk to each other again. But I am saying that we could all stand to unplug and get inside our own heads a little more often. Number 3, take a good look at what's inside your own suitcase and why you put it there. So extroverts, maybe your suitcases are also full of books, or maybe they're full of champagne glasses or skydiving equipment. Whatever it is, I hope you take these things out every chance you get and grace us with your energy and your joy. But introverts, you being you, you probably have the impulse to guard very carefully what's inside your own suitcase, and that's okay. But occasionally, just occasionally, I hope you will open up your suitcases for other people to see, because the world needs you and it needs the things you carry. So I wish you the best of all possible journeys and the courage to speak softly. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.